Hello everybody, welcome back. Scorpio Caesar here. Thank you for tuning in once again, and it's September 26th. Alright, 27 years ago, the Nintendo 64 was released in North America, and this is a console that I have a lot of memories with, and it's one from my childhood. This is a console that introduced a generation to a new dimension of gaming, and that is with 3D graphics. It was amazing at the time. I was amazed by it. And even to this day, I'm discovering new titles for it that I never got to experience in my childhood. So today we're going to talk a little bit about it and my collection of games that I've procured within the past 3-4 years. So with that, welcome to the cesArcade.
Get ready.
Oh my god, 27 years ago. I can't believe it. And even longer still, from Japan. But that's besides the point. The Nintendo 64 was a system that, at the time, my family, we only grew up with Nintendo. So we had the NES, we had the Super Nintendo, and then we got the Nintendo 64. But we didn't get it right away, okay? This is a console that we actually rented from Blockbuster. It came in its own briefcase. And my father would rent it here and there, and my first ever experience with 3D gaming was Super Mario 64. And being a fan of Mario Brothers as it was, having played Super Mario World, Super Mario Brothers 3, the original Super Mario Brothers, it was amazing. I just couldn't believe my eyes and my hands and what I was playing. I was controlling this 3D Mario game, and it was just amazing. And I'm sure a lot of kids from my generation, from the 90s, felt the same exact way, and it truly was a magical experience. I mean, the Nintendo 64 doesn't get enough credit, I feel personally, especially in recent years. I feel that it's been overlooked, and it definitely was overlooked a bit during its console generation. Granted, not as much as the Sega Saturn, but that's a topic for a different video. That being said, I feel it was overshadowed by the PlayStation, kind of coming out of left field. It also introduced a lot of new innovations that would follow through in the following years. So first off, let's get to it. Collection-wise, this is not my childhood console. I actually lost that one back in 2017. Completely destroyed, water damage through the wazoo. There was no way in saving that or my childhood collection of games, which I've luckily since reclaimed. But I do have the original N64 gray model. Now this one I got from Cali Claims. I got it for like $30. I think it was $30 or $35. It's missing the little feet down here. It's got some cosmetic wear that I ended up having to crazy glue some pieces together. But this was just kind of like a project. This was something I wanted to work on. I ended up getting the Voltar RGB kit and modding it myself. And honestly, I don't regret it, having it hooked up to the RetroTink 5X with RGB SCART. It looks great, honestly. A lot of people dunk on the N64 because of its video quality. Today's standards, yes, it doesn't look that great. Nintendo decided to employ some type of de-blur with it to help with the anti-aliasing. I think it did not age well whatsoever, but there are a lot of RGB kits that have come out since that add some de-blur to it. So, but with the RetroTink 5X and the current RGB kit that I have installed in here, I think it looks perfectly fine. You can see some of the gameplay that I have here. Makes a world of difference to me, and it's just good enough. So yeah, this one has seen better days. I do want to restore it a bit more, get a better bottom shelf for it, just out of preservation's sake. But the plan was with this one was to take the motherboard with the RGB kit and swap it with this fantastic one that I got not too long ago, and basically make this my main console. Hell, I even want to change out the RGB light in there to make it green so that it really does feel like a watermelon fantastic console. That's my plans for that one. This one is going to get hooked up to the old CRT TV for that classic vintage feel. I'll get to it eventually. So yeah, put it out there. This is the only piece I have left from my childhood console. This is the Atomic Purple N64 controller. I do need to dust it. I haven't used it in quite a while, but this was not the original controller that I had for it. We had, the standard model gray controller that came with the system, as well as a separate yellow one. So what happened was my eventual brother-in-law, Livingston, ended up having this controller. And he liked the yellow one and asked if we could trade. And so I was like, hey Dad, do you mind if we trade? He's like, I don't care, it's your controller, you do what you want with it. So I decided to trade, and since I have a thing for translucent controllers, this is the one I have to this day. The only piece left from my N64 childhood. So that is a bit of a nostalgic factor right there. Very good memories with that controller. Control stick's seen better days, granted, but that's besides the point. This is the Funtastic one, like I said, that we showed off in one of my recent video game pickup series. If you haven't checked out that video, there's a funny story behind getting this console and the trials and tribulations of getting some eBay seller to admit fault.
What is that?
Here we have it. This is the controller I've been using with it recently, well, with this console. And it's such a fantastic console, man. I mean, it lives up to its name. I'm sorry, I couldn't help but leave that pun in there. I just love translucent consoles, or translucent anything for that matter. And the fact that Nintendo had the foresight to release these beautiful consoles in so many different colors, it's beautiful. I mean, just look at it. It's in pristine shape. It's got a few scratches here and there. Not a big deal that I can't take care of. But yeah, I mean, I love this thing. And I can't wait to have this hooked up as my main N64. This was the color I always loved growing up as a kid, and I always wanted this one. So I finally ended up getting it. Would I like the other Funtastic consoles? Would I like the Pikachu edition one? Of course. But, money is not unlimited, so I have to take it easy there. There are some accessories that I have for it that I would like to share before I get to the game collection, so let's do that real fast. Here we have the N64 expansion pack. This is not 100% necessary unless you want to play certain games. You got to use this with Majora's Mask, you got to use it for Donkey Kong 64. That's just the way it is. It helped certain games run at higher resolutions. That also kind of affected the frame rate depending on the game. So if you're going to own the N64, do I suggest you pick one of these up? Yes, and make sure you get a first party one. Is it 100% necessary? No, if you don't plan on playing Donkey Kong 64 or Majora's Mask, you don't really need it, but I always suggest that you get it if you do. Standard consoles always came with the original jumper pack, which was necessary for it to even run. I also have two memory cards. One of them is from Performance, and I also have a N64 controller pack, which was the official memory card for the system. Certain games required memory cards, certain games saved on the cartridge. It was luck of the draw. Mostly first-party titles used cartridge saves, but a lot of them also used the memory cards, so they're kind of necessary. Next up, we have the N64 transfer pack, and come on, everybody who has N64 has played Pokemon Stadium or Pokemon Stadium 2, and this is kind of like a requirement for it. Playing the Pokemon Stadium games on the Nintendo Switch Online, you miss out on the main feature, which was taking your Pokemon from Generations 1 and Generations 2 and putting them in the game through the transfer pack. It was a magical experience, still is to this day in my honest opinion, and I can't imagine playing Pokemon Stadium without it, so I kind of had to own it again. And then last but not least, we have the Rumble Pack, which was, as far as I know, the very first time a console has ever had force feedback in its controller. Granted, it was done through an accessory this time around, but the Rumble and these original Rumble Packs were second to none. I mean, this thing's got a little heft to it, so it added some extra weight to the controller, which I was 100% behind because it made it feel premium. But this thing takes, I think, two AAA batteries. Yep, two AAA batteries. And, I mean, it worked wonders. It came packed in with games like Star Fox 64, so you kind of had to have it if you had an N64, but I didn't own Star Fox 64 as a kid, so I had to get this one separately. Now that the consoles and accessories is out of the way, my backstory behind it, let's talk about the game collection itself. Really excited to share this with you all, so let's get to it. Okay, we're going to do this in alphabetical order. Hopefully I can keep this all organized so putting it back on the game wall isn't such a hassle. So let's start with 1080 snowboarding. Next up we have 007 GoldenEye, a game that needs no introduction. I mean, come on. I still remember getting this at Toys R Us at the time and being a huge fan of it. To this day, it's still one of the most influential first-person shooters on a console. Next up we have 007 The World Is Not Enough. Some games came in different colored cartridges. This one was one of them. This one came in a blue cartridge. An interesting first-person shooter from EA Sports. I believe Eurocom developed this one. I could be wrong. Didn't live up to the GoldenEye hype, which was expected, but it's still a good first-person shooter and 007 game. Next up, we have Armorines Project Swarm. This was based off a comic book, and it was developed by the guys who made the Turok games, Acclaim at the time. The game has issues from what I've played. The frame rate isn't that great, but I mean, it kind of feels like Starship Troopers with all these bugs that you're shooting, and it's not bad. I enjoy it for what it is. Next up, we have Army Men Air Combat. I like how this one comes in a green cartridge. It just kind of fits. Made by 3DO, back when they were still making games, and this one's actually pretty decent. It's not too bad. I had fun with it. Next up, we have Army Men Sarge's Heroes 2. I still gotta get the first one, but it's not a necessary game. Honestly, I was never really big on the Army Men games in particular. This is the one that comes in the gray cartridge, so yeah, it is what it is. Next up, we have Automobili Lamborghini. There's just something about 5th generation racing games that I absolutely adore. And this one's actually pretty decent. It looks pretty good. It plays well enough. And it's seen better days. I mean, the cartridge has tan lines, but it's still a fun game, and I got it for like, what, $5? Next up, we have two of my favorite games on the N64 in general. I mean, these games really need no introduction, but I have to talk about them real briefly. Banjo-Kazooie and Banjo-Tooie. You can't have an N64 collection without these games, in my honest opinion. They were two of the most influential platformers and games in general at the time, and hell, two of my favorites from that generation. Honestly, if I had a scale, these will be at the top. I just love them so much. They really do mean a lot to me. Next up, we have Battle Tanks and Battle Tanks 2 Global Assault. Both games from 3DO. These are actually pretty fun. I still remember the ads more than anything, where the Snuggles bear was pretty much being like attacked by these tanks and getting destroyed. They were hilarious ads, and they did their job because I still remember these games to this day. Did I play them in my childhood? No, but I own them now, so I guess the ad campaign was successful. Next up, we have Beetle Adventure Racing. This is a fun racing game using the Beetle license, and I mean, you got a track inspired by like Jurassic Park with a T-Rex in the background. You got Indiana Jones caves and lava. It's a fun racing game, and it's only on the N64 as far as I know. Blast Corps. This is one of those early Rare games back when, man, Rare was kicking so much ass in the N64 era. That's their golden era. It doesn't get any better than that, honestly. Blast Corps was one of their earlier games. You could still play this on the Rare Replay with updated, resolution and stuff like that. But for me, playing it on the N64 is the way to go. And it's a game that you can probably get up for like $10-15. Next up, we have Body Harvest by Midway. This is a very interesting game that I had no clue existed up until recently. It's kind of like an open environment, open world area. You can visit like buildings and enter them. But the main thing is you're fighting these gigantic insects. And next up we have Bomberman Hero. Bomberman's foray into 3D platforming. It's a very fun game, very interesting, and the music in this game is to die for. Anybody listen to Zip before or Milky? Oh my god, those... Buck Bumble. This game's main menu theme is probably more popular than the actual game itself. That being said, it's developed by Argonaut Software, and they were the ones who did the Croc games. They did Star Fox, the early Star Fox games. Vehicle shooter, I mean, Buck Bumble, he's a bee, you fly around, you can land, but it's very fun, very interesting, kind of frustrating at times, but definitely worth checking out. Castlevania 64. There was a second Castlevania released for the N64, which was pretty much a better version of this one, but I figured that one being as expensive as it is, I picked this one up, check it out. It's it's weird, it plays awkwardly, but it's still got some really cool environmental features, and the music is very interesting as well. Next up we have Chopper Attack. If you like Army Men's air combat game, you're probably going to like this one. It has to do with a lot of helicopters and vehicles that you fly around and destroy stuff with. It's simple, arcadey action, and definitely worth trying. Cruisin' USA and Cruisin' World. I remember renting this one as a kid, really enjoying it, but Cruisin' World was where it was at. I really enjoyed this one. We borrowed it from my cousins, we ended up owning it. It was fun. I love them both, but in particular, I like Cruisin' World most. I still need to get Cruisin' Exotica though, that's another one I gotta add to the must-have list. Another iconic game for the system. And the N64, despite its smaller library, has a plethora of gems on it and games that are just unique to it, and Diddy Kong Racing was definitely one of them. I mean, this game was like Mario Kart 64, but it added so much more. It had like an adventure mode to it, and I have so many childhood memories with it. My sister and I always talk about it all the time. And fun fact, I actually told one of my friends back in first grade, his name was Niall, right? We always used to joke about how like Whiz Pig and Drumsticks were not playable. So I told him one day in this game that they were playable. You just had to enter a couple of cheat codes which were absolute bullshit, and I pulled them out of my ass. It was 1, 2, 3 Whiz Pig and ABC Drumsticks. So he was like, okay, I'm gonna try it out, but if they don't work, I'm gonna slap you. So following week, I go up to him and I freaking had to remind him about that, and he was like, yeah, I tried them, they didn't work, and he slapped the shit out of me. Good times. Good times. Next up we have Donkey Kong 64. This was another rare developed platformer after Banjo-Kazooie that I really wanted to play and get into. I mean, look at this one. I mean, it comes in a yellow cartridge, for crying out loud. Doesn't that just rock? Granted, I never really got into it. I still need more time, but I want to get into it and play through it to completion at some point. But one of those games that were exclusive to the N64. Next up, we have a bit of a weird one, Earthworm Jim 3D. This was Earthworm Jim's jump into the 3D platforming. It's interesting because it wasn't well received, but it's alright from what I played. I did spend more than I would have liked for it, but this is starting to become one of the more sought after N64 games. You might notice how it's in a translucent case. That was from the reseller. They decided to swap the case given that the original case had a Blockbuster sticker, completely ruining the actual label on the front. But I mean, they included it in there, so if I want to keep it authentic, I can. But I like this. It's really nice. Next up we have Excitebike 64, Extreme G and Extreme G2, both futuristic motorcycle racing games. These are pretty good. I do prefer the first one. The second one's track design and frame rate doesn't really hold up. So the first one is where it's at, but these games were cheap. You get them for like $4 each. Next up we have Formula 1 World Grand Prix, Flying Dragon. Next up we have Forsaken 64, a game that makes me motion sick. It's kind of like a Descent inspired game. Never played Descent, so this was new to me. And Gex 3, Deep Cover Gecko. I have all the PlayStation versions of the Gex games, but I always wanted to try out the games on the N64. They look a little worse, they play about the same. This one is actually pretty good. Next up we have Glover. Another one of those N64 era platformers that were very interesting, unique. A lot of YouTubers these days talk about it in high regard. It had a PlayStation 1 version, but the N64 version was where it was at for me. So Called Hexen. This is kind of like a Doom style first person shooter. Looks great on the N64 since it's mostly sprite based. But yeah, it's very fun. But it's very interesting and I really do like it. Next up, Killer Instinct Gold. This was a Killer Instinct game that I never got around to playing. I always wanted to. But then eventually I finally picked it up in recent months and checked it out. It's missing Riptor, which was like my favorite character in the original Killer Instinct. But it's still a pretty solid fighter to this day and it looks pretty damn good. Next up, we have another Rare developed game, Jet Force Gemini. Most people probably overlooked this one. You can play it on Rare Replay these days, as with most of these N64 Rare games. But playing it on the N64, it feels a little bit more natural in terms of controller scheme-wise. And it's pretty good. I haven't gotten really into it, but this is a game I always wanted to check out. Next up, Kirby 64, The Crystal Shards. Kirby made the transition to 3D before Metroid ever did, and it was a pretty solid game. Some people like it, some people don't like it as much, but it's not a bad game. It's a Kirby game. Knockout Kings 2000. You can't have the N64 without one of these games. The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. And of course, The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask. Hey, once again, Skull Kid. I love Majora's Mask. Never got around to finishing it, but I do love Majora's Mask itself. The design always caught my eye in magazines, and it's one I definitely want to play through. Well, this is the one with the lenticular label on the front in mint condition. Next up, we have Lode Runner 3D. Mario Golf. This is where they started getting really good with the Mario sports games. Mario Kart 64, I mean, come on. I played this so many times as a kid. This is one of the ones we owned. Actually, I think my brother-in-law Livingston was the one who actually gave us his copy. Since we played it so much, he probably didn't play it as much, but got this one again recently. It's one of the more higher expensive Mario games on the system, and rightfully so. I mean, it's an iconic one. This was my first Mario Kart game, so hands down, still one of my favorites. And Mario Tennis. Next up, we have Milo's Astro Lanes. This is a weird bowling game. It's hard to explain. You see the gameplay here. It's just weird. It's out there. It's unique to the console though, so that's why I got it. Mischief Makers. Another game that was like only on the N64, developed by Treasure. And this game, a lot of people really do like. It's one that I really want to spend a little bit more time into because I've only pretty much just tried it once. And hell, it even still has the Blockbuster video label on the back, so that's pretty cool. Mission Impossible. I have a lot of fond memories of this game for all the wrong reasons, but a lot of it comes down to the embassy function. That song is just so damn good. I love it. Next up, Pokemon Snap. I wish the label for this one was in better shape, but this is another N64 game that is unique to it and is iconic. I mean, taking photos of Pokemon, that's all it is. Pokemon Stadium. Talked about this earlier when I talked about the transfer pack. You can't have an N64 collection without this, in my honest opinion. Unless you just don't like Pokemon. In that case, sorry. Still gotta get Pokemon Stadium 2 though. Quake 2, Rampage World Tour, Rayman 2, Revolt. Originally had this on the Dreamcast, decided to sell it to a friend, and I ended up picking it up on the N64 to give it another shot. Bad idea, the N64 version is significantly worse. Another game from my childhood came from my brother-in-law at the time, Ridge Racer 64. This is probably one of my favorite Ridge Racer games in general. Just the music alone sets this one apart. It's got a fantastic soundtrack. I mean, they all do, but this one in particular I just remember the most. I don't know why. Roadsters. Mortal Kombat 4. Mystical Ninja starring Goemon and Goemon's Great Adventure. These two are going up in price and it doesn't look like they're going to go down anytime soon. If you own the N64 and like 3D/2D platformers, you definitely want to pick these ones up sooner rather than later. They're both fun, quirky games with a very silly story and they don't take themselves seriously. Part of the Mystical Ninja series, both worth owning. Off-Road Challenge, this is one from the Cruisin' developers. Never actually got around to playing it because when I tried it, it didn't work on my console. Perfect Dark, successor to GoldenEye, Rare's second attempt at a first-person shooter, and oh my god, this game is amazing. If you have Xbox 360s, download the HD version or play it through Rare Replay if you really want to get it crispy and good looking. This is another game where you need the expansion pack for. Otherwise, you're only limited to, I think, some of the multiplayer modes. So yeah. Pilot Wing 64, another early N64 game that I have a lot of fond memories with. My sister Amanda, when we played this, it was fun because it was such a relaxing game, but it was so difficult. She actually got around to playing it recently, and oh my god, she was terrible at it. It was hilarious though, so yeah. Rocket Robot on Wheels. This is a game I had no idea existed at the time, but now I do. This was Sucker Punch's first 3D game, and wow. Definitely feel the roots of Sly Cooper in here. It's kind of a physics-based 3D platformer. Definitely worth owning if you own an N64. Probably one of the more harder ones to get these days. Rush 2 Extreme Racing USA. Shadowgate 64 Trails of the Four Towers. This is kind of a first-person walking adventure game where it deals with a lot of environmental puzzles. Very interesting. Didn't know about it at the time. Just discovered it recently and played a bit of it. Actually was really liking it. Granted, it hasn't aged that well graphically, but it's still worth checking out if you're into that sort of thing. Shadow Man on the Nintendo 64. I forgot I got this actually. I got this recently in a claim sale, and I still yet to actually devote some time into it, so I definitely should do that. Space Station Silicon Valley. This was another one of those early Rockstar games. This game is weird. It's kind of like a 3D platformer, almost, kinda, sort of. It's hard to explain, but it's very quirky, very interesting. And at the time, you know, like these days, they don't make games like this anymore. Next up, we have Snowboard Kids. One of those rare another one of those N64 games that a lot of people talk fondly of at the time. I really didn't know they existed, but I wish I did because they're actually really fun. This is only the first one. I still got to get the second one at some point. Spider-Man on the N64. Star Fox 64. A game I wish I played and enjoyed back when I was a kid. Returning to it now, it's good. It's great even, but I was never big on the early Star Fox games. I just didn't play them at the time. Okay, so first we have Star Wars Episode 1 Racer. This one I remember playing with my brother-in-law Luke at the time, and it was awesome. I mean, getting to play as Anakin Skywalker and the whole pod racing element of Episode 1 was so unique of a game idea, and it was fun. It was a racing game, obviously, and it was hard. Star Wars Shadows of the Empire. Oh my god. This was like my second ever Star Wars game I ever played, and Jesus, this game was amazing at the time. To this day, I still go back and play it. I mean, granted, it would feel better with an HD remaster, but come on. Everybody played Shadows of the Empire, okay? And then Star Wars Rogue Squadron, another one of my N64 classics from my childhood. This one is one of my favorite games on the system, and it's one I return to regularly from time to time again. Next up, we have Star Wars Episode 1 Battle for Naboo. It was kind of like this follow-up to Rogue Squadron before they ended up doing the GameCube games, and it definitely has that Star Wars Rogue Squadron DNA. Of course, the game that started it all for me on the N64, Super Mario 64. Come on. Why are we even talking about it at this point? I already spoke about it earlier. It's Super Mario 64, one of the most iconic, influential games on the system. You can't talk about the N64 without talking about that one right there. So let's move on. Disney's Tarzan, Tonic Trouble, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, Top Gear Overdrive, Top Gear Rally, Toy Story 2. Next up we have the 4 Turok games on the Nintendo 64. Absolutely adore these games, especially with their HD remasters. In particular, Turok 3 is finally getting the HD remaster treatment from Night Dive Studios, and I can't wait for that one to come out. The first game came out on a gray cartridge, and then Turok 2, Turok 3, and Turok Rage Wars came out on black cartridges. Granted, there were gray variants as well. Rage Wars in particular, the gray variant for this one is probably the most expensive N64 game out there right now. It's wild. Next up, Wave Race 64, another iconic N64 game. WCW vs NWO World Tour, WCW vs NWO Revenge, Wipeout 64. I had no idea they made a Wipeout game on the N64. To my knowledge, I always thought it was a Sony exclusive game, but apparently not. Okay, we have no more room here. What's going on? Let's move some of these over.
Cruel, cruel world, must I go on? Cruel, cruel world, I'm moving on.
WWF Warzone, WWF WrestleMania 2000, WWF No Mercy. Tons of people feel that this is the best wrestling game at the time. Me, I was more of a SmackDown guy. And last but not least, to round out my Nintendo 64 collection, Yoshi's Story. People give this game a lot of flack, man. I don't give a damn. I love this game growing up. I used to play with my cousins all the time. We used to rent it. Never got around to owning it until much later on. And now I have it once again. Still one of my favorite N64 games of all time. If you've played it, you know it's a unique 2D side-scrolling Yoshi adventure. Not as good as Yoshi's Island. Nobody said it was gonna be, but still, I love this game. Music is fantastic and definitely worth checking out if you own an N64. And I said that a lot, but that's the end of the collection video. I know it was a long one. I hope you all found it enjoyable and fun. With that out of the way, if you like videos like this and would like to see more, and you like my face and what I do here, don't forget to hit the subscribe button, share the video with some of your friends, and like the video, of course. Let me know in the comments section below if you grew up with the Nintendo 64. Did you have fond memories with it like I did? If so, I want to hear about them. I think the one thing I want to know the most, though, in the comments section is, what was your favorite N64 game growing up? And what was your least favorite? Do you have a big collection like me, or is your collection a little smaller, more compact? Doesn't matter, I want to know about it. Let me know in the comment section below. Thank you again for tuning in, everybody, and happy 27 years to the Nintendo 64, the pioneer for 3D gaming in my life, and I love this system to death. Alright, thanks for watching once again, everybody. Remember, I wish you all a good game, and good night.